The storm rolled in like a living thing, growling, twisting, hungry. The first sign came when the wind shifted, turning cold and sharp, making the clothes on the line whip like frightened birds. Sarah Miller had been outside, hanging her last piece of laundry, her fingers red from the cold, when she felt the ground tremble under her boots. She looked up just in time to see the sky bruising into a deep, swirling gray. A funnel cloud touched down on the far edge of the prairie, pulling dust and debris into its wild dance. For one frozen heartbeat, she just stared, her mind blank except for a whisper that sounded like her late husband's voice. "Get the boy. Now." "Tommy!" she shouted, running toward the house. Her breath came in ragged bursts, the laundry forgotten, the basket tipping over and spilling shirts into the mud. The wind was picking up fast, hurling bits of straw and dirt into her face. Inside, little Tommy was crouched by the window, clutching his toy horse, his big blue eyes wide with confusion. "Mama, is it a twister?" "Yes, baby, come on," she said, grabbing his hand. The air in the house already hummed with pressure, a sound that wasn't quite thunder, but wasn't silence either, something alive and dangerous. She yanked open the cellar door and pushed him down the wooden steps. The world outside screamed. They huddled together in the damp dark, the lantern flickering weakly. Above them, the house creaked, then roared, the sound of splintering wood and breaking glass filling the air. Tommy began to cry, pressing his face into her shoulder. She whispered to him, rocking him the way she had when he was a baby. "It's all right, sweetheart. It'll pass soon. Just hold on." Minutes felt like hours. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the sound began to fade. The roar softened into a low hum, then into nothing but the patter of rain. The storm had moved on. Sarah waited a few more seconds before pushing open the cellar door. When she emerged, her heart sank. The world she'd known was scattered across the yard like a child's broken toy. The barn's roof was gone. The chicken coop was splintered. A wagon wheel lay lodged in her front gate. The air smelled of wet earth and wood dust, the sky strangely quiet and gold after the fury. She set Tommy on the steps. "Stay right there," she said softly. "Mama needs to look around." That's when she saw him. A man, lying by the fence about 20 yards out, half covered in debris. For a second, she thought it was one of her neighbors, maybe Mr. Peterson from the next farm over. But as she got closer, she realized she didn't recognize him at all. He was young, maybe in his 30s, tall and built like someone used to hard work. His clothes were torn and soaked with mud. A trickle of blood ran from his temple down into the collar of his shirt. "Sir?" she called out, kneeling beside him. He didn't answer. She pressed her fingers to his neck. There, a pulse, faint but steady. Relief washed over her like a breath of sunlight. "All right, mister," she murmured. "You're not dying on my property today." With effort, she hooked her arms under his and pulled, grunting as she dragged his weight toward the porch. He groaned once, eyes fluttering open for a second. Gray eyes, storm gray, piercing and dazed. "Easy," she said. "You're safe now." He blinked, trying to focus. "Horse ran off," he mumbled. "Didn't see it coming." "You and half the county," she muttered, breathless. "You'll be lucky if that horse isn't halfway to Texas by now." By the time she got him inside, her arms ached and her dress was plastered to her skin. She eased him onto one of the kitchen chairs and went for water, setting a pot to boil on the stove. The fire sputtered weakly, but it would do. When she turned back, he was watching her, though his head still lolled a little from exhaustion. "You shouldn't be moving," she said firmly, dipping a rag into the warm water and pressing it to his forehead. "You've got a nasty cut." He winced but didn't pull away. "You sure you ought to be helping me?" His voice was deep, slow, and rough like gravel. "Don't be foolish. You're hurt, and I've got 2 hands that work. That's reason enough." He gave a ghost of a smile. Most folks would just leave a stranger where he fell. "Well, I'm not most folks," she replied simply. Tommy peeked out from behind the doorway, still clutching his horse.
"Mama, is he gonna die?"
The man's eyes softened. "Not today, kid," he said quietly. Sarah shot him a look that was half warning, half amusement. "Don't scare him. He's had enough for one night." The man's eyes followed her as she moved around the kitchen, checking the pot, tearing a piece of cloth, lighting another lantern. Despite the exhaustion pulling at her, she moved with calm precision. Every motion spoke of someone used to surviving alone, When she came back to him, he asked quietly, "You and the boy live out here by yourselves?" She hesitated. "My husband passed 2 winters ago. It's just us now." He nodded slowly, eyes lowering. "Then I'm sorry for taking up your space." "Don't be silly," she said again, wrapping the blanket from the couch around his shoulders. "Any man caught in that storm would need help. Tornado doesn't care who you are." He looked at her then, really looked. At the lines on her face, the strength in her hands, the quiet resolve in her eyes. "You remind me of someone," he said softly. "Who's that?" she asked, wringing out the cloth. "Someone who didn't quit when life knocked her flat." Sarah didn't answer. She ladled out a bowl of soup and placed it in front of him. "Eat," she said simply. He lifted the spoon with trembling hands, the smell of broth and herbs filling the quiet room. Tommy crept closer, sitting by his mother's side. "What's your name?" she asked after a while. "Jack," he said. "Jack Lawson." "Well, Jack Lawson," she replied. "You're welcome to stay until you can ride again. County's a mess. Roads will be bad for days." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he said, "I'll find a way to repay you." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Don't worry about that. Just be glad you're alive." Outside, the rain softened into a steady rhythm on the roof. The smell of wet earth drifted in through the broken window. For the first time since the storm began, Sarah let herself breathe. She looked at the stranger sitting at her table, the man she'd dragged in from the wreckage, and something deep inside her shifted. There was a steadiness in him, a quiet strength that felt oddly familiar, comforting. She didn't know it yet, but the man whose life she had just saved wasn't a drifter at all. He was Jack Lawson, the rancher who owned half the land for miles, and who, before long, would own her heart too. 2 weeks later, the Oklahoma plains had found their calm again, though Sarah's farm still wore the scars of the storm. The barn roof had been patched with whatever lumber Jack could salvage, and the front porch leaned a little more than before. But the smell of sawdust and fresh paint hung in the air, and somehow that smell meant hope. Jack hadn't left. Every morning, Sarah would wake before sunrise to the sound of his hammer or the scrape of his boots against the gravel. He worked like a man who needed to prove something, to her, or maybe to himself. Tommy adored him, trailing behind with his toy horse and 1,000 questions about cowboys, cattle, and guns. Jack answered everyone with patient humor, even carving the boy a small wooden horse one evening by lantern light. Sarah didn't ask him to stay, but she didn't tell him to leave either. After the storm, silence had been her constant companion. Now it was laughter, and the sound of 2 voices filling spaces that had long been empty. That evening, as the last light of day bled across the horizon, she found Jack mending the fence that bordered the north pasture. The air smelled of grass and smoke, the sunset painting the land gold and crimson. He'd taken off his hat, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing arms marked by years of work. "You'll wear yourself out if you keep at it like that," she called, walking toward him with 2 mugs of coffee. He smiled, straightening. "If I stop now, the coyotes will finish what the storm started." She handed him a mug. "You've already done more than enough." "You didn't have to fix all this." Jack took the coffee, eyes glinting beneath the fading light. "Didn't have to, maybe, but I wanted to." They stood in quiet for a while, listening to the wind moving through the wheat. Tommy was asleep inside, leaving the world still except for the creak of the gate. "Never did ask where you were headed that day," Sarah said finally, her voice soft. Jack looked out toward the fields, then down at his boots. "Truth is, I wasn't headed anywhere. Sometimes a man rides just to forget what he's running from." Her gaze lingered on him. "You running from something, Jack?" He gave a low chuckle. "Maybe from everything. Maybe just from the noise. It's strange. Half the county knows my name, but not one of them really knows me." She tilted her head, studying him. "Half the county?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly as if realizing he'd said too much. "Figure of speech." Sarah laughed softly. "You're not very good at lying, you know." He took a sip of his coffee, avoiding her eyes. "Never had much reason to be." The wind picked up again, warm and slow, carrying with it the smell of rain that would come later that night. The sky had turned violet, the stars beginning to blink through. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "You've been good to us," she said almost shyly. "To me. I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," Jack said simply, turning to her. "You dragged me out of the mud when you could have just saved yourself. I reckon I owe you more than you'll ever know." She looked down at her hands, rough and scarred from years of hard work. "It's what anyone decent would have done." Jack set his mug down on the fence post. "No, ma'am. I've met plenty of folks who'd ride on by. You didn't." Their eyes met then, hers full of quiet strength, his of something gentler, almost reverent. The evening light caught her hair, and for a fleeting second, she looked like something the storm couldn't touch. "Sarah," he said after a moment, his voice lower now. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased, stained with dust, but unmistakably official. He held it out to her. She frowned, taking it. "What's this?" "Deed to this land," he said. "Yours." Her heart stuttered. "What do you mean, mine? This is my property already." Jack shook his head slowly. "Not quite. After your husband passed, the bank took half the claim. You've been living on borrowed grace. They were going to foreclose next month." Her eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm the one they were selling it to." His voice was steady, though his jaw was tight. "Jack Lawson. Lawson Ranch. I own most of the land between here and the river. The papers crossed my desk a month ago. I was supposed to come inspect what I'd bought, but then that storm hit." Sarah just stared at him, speechless. The words sank in slowly, heavy as thunder. "So you—" she began, voice trembling. "You're the man who owns half the county." He nodded once. "Guess so." For a long moment, all she could hear was the wind. Her pulse hammered in her throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to be that man. Not to you. You didn't see a rancher or a name. You saw a hurt man and helped him anyway. Nobody's done that for me in a long time." Sarah clutched the deed in her hands, unable to speak. Part of her wanted to be angry. Angry that he'd kept it from her. Angry that her pride was now tangled with his generosity. But when she looked at him, all she saw was honesty. Not arrogance, not pity. Just a quiet man trying to make things right. "You bought my land," she said finally. "Then gave it back?" He nodded. "It's yours, free and clear. The county clerk will confirm it tomorrow. You and Tommy won't ever have to worry about losing this place again." Her lips parted, her breath unsteady. "Why would you do that for us?" Jack looked at her for a long moment. "Because you reminded me what it means to care without asking anything in return. You helped me remember who I was before the money, before the fences and titles. I don't think I could ever repay that." The air between them shifted then, soft, electric, full of something unspoken. Sarah blinked hard, her throat tight. "You don't owe me anything, Jack." "Maybe not," he said, stepping closer. "But I don't aim to ride away either." The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the world was washed in dusky gold. Sarah's heart beat hard enough that she could feel it in her fingertips. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. Jack reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch careful, reverent. "I'm saying maybe that storm didn't tear through our lives for no reason. Maybe it blew me right where I was meant to be." Her breath caught. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of loss pressing on her chest. Instead, there was warmth. A fragile, steady flame she hadn't realized she still had the courage to feel. Tommy's laughter floated through the open window from inside, breaking the moment gently. Sarah smiled through her tears. "You really don't play fair, Mr. Lawson." Jack smiled, his voice low. "No, ma'am, but I play honest." And as the wind carried the smell of rain and wheat through the fading light, the struggling widow and the quiet cowboy stood side by side, the ruins of the storm behind them and something new, something whole, just beginning to grow.